So apparently my camera is not straight. Let me quickly fix that for you. Hi. For this video I'm trying something different, something new. Something new is always exciting. I was thinking about some questions I got in the comment sections of several videos where I always make the promise of making a video about it. But these things start stockpiling in my head, and I'm sure at some point I will start forgetting about them if I just don't do the video quickly enough, because there's always so much going on here, and it's probably also a side effect of getting older that I start forgetting stuff. So I thought it would be a cool idea to try to make a monthly video where I just record a collection of those patches, the things that I promised to show or demonstrate or at least try out once in a video. So this is the first video of that kind, and I will just call this video series "I will make a video about it." So instead of me just yapping away telling you about this, let's get the video started. I hope you enjoy this. One thing that I promised I would make some kind of a video about was using the linear FM on filter 8. In this video I will just show you one patch with it, which I personally think sounds really rad. So let me bring in the oscillator a little bit more. You can see that I'm using filter 8 as a VCO right now. It's self-resonating, and I'm using two outputs, the first and the third. These are routed through data. The red cable is the green trace. This green signal and the left signal here is also panned to the left on my mixer, and then the third output is going into data. This is the blue trace. This is routed to a channel on my mixer that's panned to the right. The red signal in between those traces, I will use that for an output of generate 3. I'm just going to use a sine wave, the fundamental wave. Let me patch it up, and you can see it wiggle away there. Generate 3 is at audio rates. It's tuned really low, but it's still audio. So let me connect this to filter 8. Please notice that the compensation switch here is to the bottom, which means it is on. Joran told me that the behavior of his switches just follow the simple logic. When a switch points to its label, it's on. Let me connect the fundamental output of generate 3 to the linear FM input on filter 8. And right off the bat, you can hear that I think that this is a really nice sound. You can see and hear when I change the frequency on generate 3, how this influences the sound. Right now, generate 3 is really at LFO rates, and you will see that now when I enable the AC filter, the influence of this slowly moving signal is much less, and you'll see when I slow it down even more that it actually gets completely filtered out by the filter in the AC circuit here. So when I switch the AC switch to the top position, which is off, you can see that the LFO that's now coming from generate 3 just influences the sound in the same way that it was doing it at audio rates. But let's go back to audio rates. Now, of course, we can modulate the effect this sine wave has on filter 8 by changing the amplitude, which is of course very easy to do on Generate 3, but if you don't have a Generate 3, you just route your output of your VCO through a VCA that you modulate with an envelope. Now on Generate 3 I can just connect an envelope to the modulator input here. This envelope is coming from maths, which is completely off screen, and it's receiving a trigger from a pattern coming from NerdSec. Let me start this sequencer. Let me add some reverb to this. Let's bring in a kick drum. Let's now connect a volt per octave sequence to the volt per octave input on filter 8. Something else that I promised to do at least some kind of exploration with in a video was trying a feedback patch with a wavefolder. Now, to make sense of this, let me first explain the routing here, because it is a little bit confusing. You can completely ignore this purple cable. I'm only using this to sync my oscilloscope to the frequency of generate 3 here. I'm using the fundamental or sine output of generate 3, and this is going into a mixer. The output of this mixer is going through data. You can see it as the red trace, and from there it goes into the input on fault 6. So if you just ignore all of these cables, you can just look at this as an attenuator for the sine wave that's going into the wavefolder. So the reason you're hearing anything now is because apart from this blue or teal stackable here, there's another blue, teal, or perhaps green cable, which is coming from the main output of the wavefolder. It is going through the scope, and from there it's just going into the mixer. So apart from the stackable, which I will explain in a minute, the routing is essentially just a sine wave coming from generate 3. It's going into the first channel on the mixer, which is going to the input on fault 6, and from there it's going into the main mixer. I've routed the signal that's coming out of the first submixer here through data. It's the red trace, and the actual main output of the wavefolder is the blue trace. So you can see the red trace is the sine wave, which was almost muted, but if I now open up the attenuator, you can see that the wavefolder creates all kinds of harmonies and folds. This is something you should really try out when you have a wavefolder. Try sending in a signal that's not a constant amplitude. You'll see that you get more folds when you increase the amplitude of the signal that's going in. But let's keep it somewhere around there. So then there's this stackable. This is the main output of the wavefolder as well. It is the blue trace here. But I've routed it back into this submixer here, which means that I can introduce this signal into the submix, which is going back into the wavefolder. So let me bring in this feedback. You can see this creates maybe not the effect that you were hoping or expecting, but feedback patches like this can be very chaotic, by which I mean that changing just one parameter ever so slightly changes the whole sound a lot. And that's what's happening when I increase the volume of the sine wave. So the third channel here is the feedback routing. The first channel is the sine wave coming from generator 3. Let's increase the amount of folding on the wavefolder itself. So the red trace is the signal that I'm sending into the wavefolder, and the blue trace is the signal that's coming out. Now let me add a trigger or gate to the frequency modulation on generator 3. And if you really want to get experimental, you could patch up a VCA and an envelope or anything else to modulate that VCA, so you don't need to turn and adjust these volumes manually. Let me add some modulation to the wavefolder's wave parameter coming from orbit 3, but you can just use slow LFO or anything else you want. Let me try patching this up so you can actually see the screen of the scope a little bit. Let me restart my sequence here. And let's add a kick drum. Let me quickly add a sequence to generator 3 as well. Something that I quickly wanted to show as well is distributing modulation sources like in stereo, but of course it doesn't make a lot of sense when you're sending modulation into ASHIKO here to use the word panning. Crossfading would be probably a much more fitting word. So first I want to show you, well, I'm not going to show you because it's completely off screen, but we're listening to a sine wave coming from Generate 3, and I want to add two methods of modulation to this sine wave. The first is exponential frequency modulation coming from another sine wave, and the second one is some phase modulation coming from a sine wave from even VCO right here, and that sounds like this. But I want to alternate between those. So what I'm doing is I'm sending this cable coming from even VCO, which will be doing the phase modulation. I'm sending this to a VCA. Let me remove this for a second. So this is now going through a VCA, but let me close that VCA manually. And then the sine wave that I will be using for exponential frequency modulation is going to another VCA. Let me close this one manually as well. Now I want to use an alternating pattern to send these two different sources into my oscillator, which is Generate 3. And for this I'm going to use ASHIKO. So I'm sending in another sine wave, but this is an LFO. It's the green cable is going into ASHIKO, and you might not know this, but I can use ASHIKO to open and close another VCA. So right now I'm using these two outputs to open and close two other VCAs, the one that I routed the modulators to. But I want to actually alternate between these two. By the way, ASHIKO is a VCA as well, and I'm using a stepped random coming from dual LFO here to modulate the sine wave that I'm sending in, which in turn modulate the levels of the two modulators that I'm using for the exponential frequency modulation and the phase modulation. This is, I realize this is all very confusing, but there's no easier way to show it. So right now we're in dual mono mode, so I'm really just sending this slow LFO through, but now I want to modulate the level of this LFO with the stepped random coming from dual LFO as well. So right now the stepped random is deciding how much of this sine LFO is going through, which modulates the amplitudes of the modulators that I'm using for the frequency and phase modulation. But by switching this to stereo and using a bipolar signal as a modulator here, you can make them alternate. And you can see this very clearly on these LEDs, which are possible because this is a translucent PCB front panel. And watching these LEDs is really useful to understand what's happening. You can switch to another crossover or crossfade curve. This one is the soft setting, but you can switch to a hard setting. I like the soft setting more for this. And now you can hear that we're alternating between phase modulation and exponential frequency modulation. The rate is set by the LFO here to the left, but where this modulation is going is decided by the stepped random, which is bipolar. Let me add some kind of beat to this. And the cool thing about ASHIKO is that whatever I'm sending in here as an input or as a modulator, this will also be used on the channels that don't have anything connected to it. So even if I connect another input here to channel 2, these outputs will be modulated by the modulator of channel 1, and you can even switch this to another behavior. It doesn't matter, just uses whatever is on top of it, until of course you break the normalization by patching something in. And this is it for this. I'll make a video about it. Let me know if you like this idea for a series. I think it's really interesting to get some patches across without doing a complete elaborate video about them, or to add addendum videos to every extensive playthrough video I do. So whenever there's a question in the comment section and I reply with "I will make a video about this," please be sure to check the, well, I will try to do these monthly, so check that monthly video labeled "I will make a video about it." And the patch I promised to show you will probably be in there. If not, let me know. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you really like my content, you can support me on Ko-fi or Patreon. Supporting any of those two pages will give you instant access to the Discord, where me and a bunch of other people talk about modular synth techniques and just stuff in general, mostly regarding synthesis or modules to get, or if someone has a question about a module, most of the times that's me just asking, hey, does anyone have any experience with this module or that module? It's been a really fun experience to talk to my supporters over there. You can also just listen to my music on Bandcamp. You can even download some albums over there. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. I'll see you next time. Bye!